Hi, everyone. My name is Andrew Seaman, and welcome to Get Hired Live. I'm so excited that you're here and joining us. As always, I want to kick off today's session by asking you to introduce yourself in the comments. We already have so many people doing that. We have our friend Dolores from Texas, Abby from New York City, where I am. We have Catherine from the UK, Ludovic from Paris. We have DeAndre from California. I saw Maboob from Toronto. So keep introducing yourselves and tell us a little bit about your job search, your career, maybe what you're looking to get out of your job search and career. Maybe you're looking to go into a new field. Maybe you're looking to, get back into the workforce, which is what we're going to be talking about today. Tell us a little bit about your career and your job search, and then network with each other. Some of the best notes I get after this show are from people who say that they've met each other in the comments and that they're actually working together to find work or work on their careers together. In fact, I know some people who've started Zoom conversations based on the comments in the show because they've met each other. So keep networking. It's the cornerstone of a successful job search, and what better time to start than right now. And then get your questions into the comments because we're going to be taking those in just a little bit. We have such a great topic today that I think a lot of people it will resonate with, which is basically how do you get back into the workforce after time away? And we have someone who's been a pioneer in the space, and I would love to bring her onto the screen right now. Her name is Carol Fishman-Cohen. She is the co-founder and the CEO of Relaunch, which is a company basically dedicated to helping other companies with their returnship programs and helping people get back into the workforce. Welcome, Carol.
Hi, Andrew. Great to be here.
Yes, and you're just off of a very successful conference, your annual conference, which I think you're actually going to start doing more regularly, that helps people get back into the workforce. So can you tell us a little bit about your background and how and why you started Relaunch?
Sure. And actually, that was our 30th conference that we just finished yesterday. So thank you for mentioning it. A real milestone for us. So I am what we call a relauncher, a person who has returned to work after a career break. Myself, I took an 11-year career break. I was home with my kids. My company, I was a financial analyst at a corporate finance department in an investment bank, and the company collapsed while I was on maternity leave with my first child. So that began my career break. I had 3 more kids. I was home with them for 11 years. It was a very long time ago. It was between 1990 and 2001. And in 2001, I relaunched my career. I went back to work as a financial analyst at an investment firm. So I really understand every phase of the transition firsthand. And no one was talking about relaunching then. I didn't know a single other person who had returned to work after taking a career break. So I felt pretty isolated and without a game plan. But first, I lived it myself by going through that process and actually relaunching my career. And then later, I got a book contract with Vivian Steer-Rabin to co-author Back on the Career Track, which we did a lot of research on in 2004 to 2006, and it came out in 2007. And that was the same year that we co-founded Relaunch. So we're the pioneering company in the career reentry space. This is not our first recession that we've just been through. And we've really been involved in the entire evolution of return to work programs since even before Relaunch was founded. So we have a long-term view, and we also are in a position to be able to spot trends right at the beginning.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And, I know so many people who this resonates with, and we have so many people in the comments I want to say hello to. We have Rashawn from India, Judy from California, Gregory from Queens, Brandon and Chris from Atlanta, Jody from Colorado, Melissa from South Africa. We have Maximo from Barcelona, who says he's getting back into the workforce after 5 years of caring for his mother. And really that shows that people leave the workforce for so many reasons, because I think a lot of people, they assume it's mothers who are taking care of children, or maybe fathers who are also taking care of their children. But really, people step away for all different reasons, right?
That is a great point. And I have to say, originally, like way back when, in 2007, when we wrote the book, we were very focused on stay-at-home moms. And since then, we've significantly broadened the way we look at the category of relauncher, as we call people returning. So it could be people who return, men or women who return to work for elder care reasons, after career breaks for elder care reasons, childcare, pursuing a personal interest, maybe their own health issue, military spouses, people who have had expat experiences where they're a trailing spouse or partner and with someone else who has an overseas assignment, even people who are unretiring after retirement. All of those categories fall into the relauncher label. And I think companies are looking at people who are taking career breaks much more broadly too.
Yeah, and in fact, I see some people in the comments who are talking about their career breaks. We have Catherine, who says she has a 10-year gap, and we have a lot of other people in the stream. Heather from Chicago, we have Monica from Madrid, Anna and Dolores from North Carolina, Christine from Los Angeles, Phyllis from Ohio, and Teresa from Atlanta. So welcome to all of you. Get your comments into the stream. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and we'll be getting to you in just a bit. And Carol, one of the questions I wanted to ask you was about returnships, because the one thing that we talked about on the phone a while ago is that when you were getting back into the workforce, there really wasn't a thing called a returnship yet. And you had to sort of chart your own path back into the workforce. But now companies have really decided, listen, this is a talent pool that's very valuable to us. They tend to be larger companies, but they have these things called returnships. Can you tell us what those are and what makes someone a good candidate for a returnship?
Sure. Well, returnship, I'd say, is the dominant category of a broader category of return to work programs, because there are different kinds now. And it really is a mid-career version of an entry-level college internship. There are some features about it that are significantly different, but for people to have a familiar reference, think about a student internship, but tweaked for the mid-career returning professional. Now, having said that, the significant difference is that we've seen these programs really evolve into what we call intent to hire programs. So instead of the idea that you're brought in for this experience for a certain number of 12, 16, 24 weeks, and almost like a contractor, and then maybe you end up getting hired or maybe you don't. The evolution now is that we call it an intent to hire program. So companies are recruiting people into these programs, and company teams, managers and teams, are integrating the relauncher into their teams as if they are going to be full-time hires. So the assumption is that they will convert as opposed to the possibility. And you can imagine how that changes the whole stance of how people are brought into the organization and then integrated into their teams. And there is transitional programming and mentoring and a real understanding that this is a population that is high caliber and doesn't lose their ability to be a high performer simply because they took a career break, but does have some kind of a ramp up period. And it's helpful when people have an organized transitional programming to go through, sometimes as with a group, with a cohort, sometimes one by one, as they're integrating back into the workforce.
Yeah. And, one thing that, in fact, we were just talking about, and we've also talked about this earlier, is that these programs are morphing a little bit, because before, I think you said it was typically people who had been out of the workforce for, I think, 2 years were basically welcomed into these programs. But now companies are saying, okay, we're going to actually make this a little bit more flexible. So can you tell us how these programs are changing, what companies are doing to overhaul them? But on top of that, who should apply to these? Because I think, we've talked about that, is that, people may say, I don't know if I'm really qualified for this, and I'm kind of unsure. So what are those answers?
Okay, so the most important thing is, if in doubt, apply for the program. Let the company or the employer decide whether you're eligible or not. Because as Andrew's mentioning, the definition of career break and the eligibility guidelines for these programs are loosening, and there's some flexibility there. We have seen a number of companies reduce the minimum number of years of career break from 2 years to 1 year, in part as a response to the almost 3 million people who withdrew from the labor force during COVID. And that includes Goldman Sachs and Amazon and Oracle and IBM and Raytheon Technologies and MasterCard and TD Bank, are to name a few of them. And then we have some companies that are redefining what the eligibility is to also include people who are, quote, underemployed. Amazon says that, Ford says that in their reentry program. So there I think this is changing, and I want people to, I'll give you some specific examples. If you've been a substitute teacher, if you taught an adjunct once a semester class at a university, you had a side job as working at Instacart just to bring in a side income, has nothing to do with your main career path. You have a consulting business that does occasional consulting. So all of those scenarios you should still apply. So people say, what if I had a business that failed? We just talked about this with a group of employers yesterday. You learn a lot when you're running a business and it fails, and companies value that experience. So yes, absolutely apply. What you should do when you're applying to these programs, and this is specifically for companies that have return to work programs, on the top of your resume under experience, don't put work experience, put experience, have a category that actually says career break, that calls it out. Career break 2015 to the present, just like it's a job, and then bullet point underneath, volunteer work that you had, and then you could put substitute teacher or occasional, Carol Fishman Cohen consulting, occasional consulting in marketing and communications. That's what we're talking about. But make sure that you're calling it out as part of your career break.
Yeah. And can you go over a little bit about some of the examples of the various programs that are out there? We talked about Returnships, but there are companies who are sort of saying, hey, listen, we could do something different here too.
Yeah, and this has been fascinating because, as I mentioned, we've really been involved with these programs when the original ones are being conceived in like 2004. So we've really seen the whole evolution. The first Returnship program was in 2008. It was a Goldman Sachs program, which is actually called Returnship. And interestingly, just 2 days ago at our Relaunch Return to Work conference, Goldman announced that they are completely reimagining their program. So it is now, instead of a 12-week returnship, it's a 6-month fellowship. And there are special qualifications and special privileges that you have because you're in a fellowship program. And you can look at the Goldman landing page, which is going live with this on Monday, I believe, and get all the features. And the other thing that they're doing is they're running a COVID track. And this is the first time we've heard this. We've talked to a number of companies about should they have a COVID cohort or people who had these much shorter career breaks because they left during COVID, as opposed to people who might have been on career break before. But this is really the first formal manifestation of an actual COVID track. That will also be announced on Monday on the Goldman Returnship program landing page. And then the other one that is also being announced on Monday, but we have permission to talk about it ahead of time, is General Motors. So General Motors has been running a Take Two program since 2016, and they were running a more traditional returnship. You were in there for a number of weeks, and it was internship-like. And now they're doing what we call direct hire. So they're bringing people on as employees from day one, and still giving them 12 weeks of transitional support and programming. And we also worked with Oracle to launch Oracle Career Relaunch, which is very similar. So hire people as employees on day one, but then still have them go through some sort of transitional programming. And really what you're seeing here is companies realizing that it's less risky than they originally thought to hire people who are coming off of a career break, recognizing they took career breaks for reasons that had nothing to do with their work performance. And originally the returnship was about risk. You have this tryout period. You can evaluate a person based on actual work sample instead of a series of interviews. But this has been a very successful model. The conversion rates have been over 80%. That means 80% of the people or more who participate in these programs end up being hired at the end of the program. And we're seeing some programs scale. So I'll just give you 3 examples, and then Andrew, back to you. So for example, Cognizant just launched this year, has already had 75 people go through their 12-week returnship. Wells Fargo started with 34 people, launched right in the middle of the pandemic. This next cohort that they're running right now has about 100. And Amazon has just announced that they're looking to expand their program to 1,000 participants. So we're also seeing a scaling that we haven't seen before. And all of this is great news for people who are returning after career breaks.
Definitely. And also, like you mentioned with the COVID track, because I know that there's a lot of people who've been employed really for the duration of the pandemic. And what's really nice is that our own research here at LinkedIn has found that hiring managers, recruiters, they say, listen, if you were laid off because of COVID, we're not holding that against you. So I could see that being a very valuable program out there. And I'm going to be I know your colleague Shannon is in the comments, but I'm going to be dropping in also a link to Relaunch's Return to Work program directory. So if you guys in the comments want to go in there, see exactly where these programs are, they have a really great and thorough directory on there. But I also, just before we get to the questions, and we have so many coming in and we have people telling us about their career breaks, I wanted to ask about people who maybe they don't have these programs in their backyard because, you know, like I said, I came from northeastern Pennsylvania, the Scranton area, where there aren't a ton of, you know, giant companies, and, you know, people may struggle in some areas to find these programs. So what are your top 3 tips for people who are trying to get back into the workforce who may not be able to take part in a traditional returnship or return to work program?
Okay, well, I think the first thing I want to say is, when you're having a conversation with an employer or potential employer, you're talking to someone who's in your field, and they express interest in you, but there's a hesitancy because of your career break. Or maybe they say, well, I think you're great, but there's no way I'm going to be able to convince my colleagues to bring you on. You can suggest essentially what a version of these company returnship programs. You can say, I understand that it would be hard. It might be hard to convince your colleagues about my candidacy, but how about if you give me a special project or some kind of a contract role where you can really see an example of my work, and then can make a permanent hiring decision on that basis instead of a series of interviews. So you are suggesting an informal one-off version of a returnship program. There's not, of course, the transitional programming and the mentoring and those elements, but there is the concept of try me out, you know, see about my actual work. Don't just judge this on interviews, and don't leave it to chance. And then you can make a decision. Now, some employers will dismiss that out of hand. Others will have never thought about it before, and it could be a possibility for them. So I'd say do that. But even before that, you need to get really specific. So when we talk to employers about the attributes of the relauncher population, and there are many, and I'm talking about people who take career breaks from 1 to over 20 years. Like, we have a podcast, 321 I Relaunch. You can listen. We have a mini series on people who took extra long career breaks, and then where they are now, like 20, I'd say 19 to 31 years. So I hope that will be inspiring to some people. But you need to get really specific in terms of what you want to do. So we talk about relaunchers. We're educated, we're experienced, we've worked already. We've worked with multi-generational teams. We've worked with different personalities. We face work deadlines. We are not in exploratory early stage career mode anymore. This is really important. So appropriately, when you're early in your career, you should be exploratory and trying a lot of different things. But with the relaunchers, it's almost the opposite. The career break is actually an opportunity for us to step back and reflect on where our interests and skills are strongest now, and we're more fully formed as humans. We're just more self-aware, and where we can add the most value to an employer. So when you're applying for a particular role and they say, why did you apply for this role? You could say, I didn't apply for this role on a whim. I applied for this role after a lot of thought and deliberation about where I can add the most value to your organization. And later, if you want, we can talk about how do you respond to someone calling you overqualified or that kind of thing. So I would say, figure out exactly what you want to do. And then the next piece, subject matter expertise. You can't skip that step. You have to get up to speed on what's going on in your field again. Now, whether that means you're taking a course, and some people who are career transitioning can do that by credentialing or coursework, that's fine. You can also do it on your own, following the top experts, reading everything that you can read about what's going on in the field, understanding the products and services and controversies, and the leading companies in it. All of that will help you build your confidence, will give you more substance to talk about in your conversations with people in your field. And that's the other piece, is you have to go public with your job search. you have to take that really hard step and go and talk to people who you know well, people who you might meet on LinkedIn. We know people who have engaged in comments on LinkedIn and met people or an expert who made the original post through that. All of those are recommendations.
Those are great tips. And in fact, I think, it's a great roadmap back. And obviously, getting back up to speed, talking to people that will pay dividends in the future, because maybe they know something that pops up that says, hey, you'd be great at this. And, I think I know the person, and it's always easier when you have that connection in a job search. So I think that's really great advice. And I want to launch into some of these questions now. And we have so many, and we have one from Ashley, who says, I took an active career break for 17 years. What is the best way to present that in my LinkedIn profile? Right now, I put volunteer work I do during my break in a separate section, but on my resume, I fit it in chronologically. Should I do the same on LinkedIn? What's your advice for someone, especially like Ashley, with a 17-year break?
So first of all, you have a 17-year career break. It's not like you're going to be sought out by employers to come back to work unless you make the case and you talk about what you've been doing during that time. I think it's perfectly appropriate to put in your LinkedIn profile substantive volunteer work that's related to what you're interested in doing. If it's some minor volunteer work, yes, put that in the volunteer section. But if it's substantive, I think during my career break, I wrote community leader, and then I wrote led school redistricting campaign, president of the PTO. So if you have those kinds of things, especially maybe you were the head of marketing for a community organization as a volunteer, and that's your field, then I would say, put that in as a job. And the other thing I would do is in your summary, I would highlight the professional specialty. So classically trained brand marketing executive with a new digital marketing certificate, or something that calls you out as someone who has a combination of experience that might be different and no one else might have that. Or maybe you just say seasoned marketing professional, and then go into the details about your coursework in your LinkedIn profile. Of course, I'll be in the education section. I'll give you one more tip there though. When you're looking for courses and credentialing, look for the ones that have some sort of a field study or a capstone project, because you can list that field study and the capstone project separate from the education and put that in the main body of the LinkedIn profile, and then explain what the problem was, what you learned in the classroom, how you applied that to the field study. And that is going to be a topic of conversation when you have when you're in interviews. But again, the key is, yes, you can work on your LinkedIn profile, and it should be as perfect as you can get it. And your resume is going to show this information slightly differently. But the key is going to be, you have to reconnect with people from the past, people with whom you worked with, people with whom you went to school, people who you meet now in a professional association or professional settings, and then casual people. You'll see in one of our podcasts, an engineer who got back after 20 years, the most important mentor was a person her friend met at a church event and introduced her to. So you never know where these important people are going to come from.
Yeah. And we have a question here that's related. This is from Catherine, who asked, what do you think about writing every activity you've done in your career gap on your resume? Something that might not look good because it could show instability, or that you're not specialized in one area. So you gave some tips about obviously structuring your LinkedIn profile, but where do you draw the line on what you actually add to your resume or your profile?
I would stick to the most significant substantive activities that you were doing, and don't get the viewer distracted by something that wasn't significant or doesn't really matter to you that much now, especially in the context of what your career goal is. So yeah, I filter those out.
Got it. And we have a question here from Jeff, and I think this is a good question, which is, what are the age groups targeted for these returnship programs? So I assume really there isn't really an age group, because you could work for maybe a year or two after college and then end up taking a break. So, are these open to all ages?
Yeah, well, actually, I worked for 7 years before taking a career break. And if you look at averages, like just at our conference a couple days ago, Alex Mooney from Amazon said that the average number of years worked before the career break for their big applicant pool for the program is 10 to 12 years. So we see there is a small group that's worked 1 to 3 years, but a lot of people have worked 5 to 7 years or really 10 years or more. So so that's so that's how that breaks down. But Andrew, remind me again exactly what you want me to answer. Sorry.
Oh yeah, basically, what age groups do these
Oh yeah, the age group.
return?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I was 42 when I returned to work after my 11-year career break. I was working for a 37-year-old. So we tell managers, be prepared for the relauncher to be older than you. We tell relaunchers, be prepared for your manager to be younger than you. And typically, we're talking about people in their 40s and 50s, sometimes in their 60s. I write articles for Harvard Business Review on this topic, and my original article was about almost 10 years ago about predicting the emergence of using internship like programs to engage successfully with relaunchers, and their editors called it the 40-year-old intern. So I'd say you're looking at a population that's somewhat older.
Yeah, and actually, we had a question from Hasina before the show who was asking, what to do about ageism. So it sounds like these companies, obviously ageism is a huge concern in the workforce, but returnships, especially if you're coming back from a break, sounds like a great way to overcome some of those obstacles, because they're going into it with basically saying, hey, listen, we expect these people who are coming into this program to be in their 40s and 50s, right?
Yeah, so let me just comment on that. So ageism, age diversity for sure is an element of the perspective that the relauncher brings back into an organization, but there's still ageism concerns that relaunchers have. And I say the antidote to ageism, again, it's subject matter expertise. So the more you know about your topic, the more substantive your comments are when you're in conversations with people, and they're going to be paying attention more to what you're talking about, the substance, as opposed to how old you are or how long your career break is. And we actually have one of our most popular podcasts is with Julie Brush, talking about interview questions that have to do with ageism and how to respond to them. So I'd also recommend to people to look up that as a resource.
Yeah, and I think your suggestion about subject matter expertise is so important, because I think a lot of people, when they're looking for work, always think, well, if I'm open to anything, I'll get something. But your value increases as your specialty increases, because they could get someone who's a jack of all trades, but there are only going to be so many people who are actually a specialist in one certain area. So I always tell people, even when I talk to young journalists who always think they're going to go in and be a general reporter and that's how they're going to get a job.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, if you want a bigger paycheck, though, I said, pick one area, because there's only going to be so many people who know that one specific area that well. So I think that's such an important point.
Yeah, it's so important. And I just want to underscore it, because we actually talk about this at our conference. Because at a part of that conference is talking to employers. There's a virtual career fair. So we actually say, don't go up to them and say, I'll do anything. I'll do anything is what employers do not want to hear. We think as relaunchers, it makes us maybe more employable and placeable and flexible, and we're quick learners. No, they want to know that's your job to figure out for yourself, not the company's job to figure out where to place you, but you have to be very specific about what you've thought about on where you can add the most value.
Yeah, and we have a question here, and this is somewhat related about specialization from Maboob, who says, any suggestion for healthcare professionals on how to relaunch after almost 15 years? And obviously, healthcare professionals, there are certain professions where the requirements are much more stringent than, say, a marketing professional. So what is your advice for people who maybe want to get back into a profession where there are certain certifications, there's certain continuing education credits? What is your suggestion for them?
It's so interesting that we're bringing up healthcare professionals as the example, because if you look back not that far to the beginning of the COVID crisis, there was a general call for all healthcare professionals out of retirement, out of career break. They loosened all the rules in terms of if you were licensed in one state, are you allowed now to work in another state? Yes. Telemedicine became allowed and privacy rules went out the window there. So I have an article on HBR about this, how Harvard Business Review in how in our hour of need, in the country's hour of need, the country was willing to relax all of these guidelines to bring back as many healthcare professionals as possible. And let's keep that in mind now as we're emerging out of COVID, if we are, but different topic. But that's what I'm thinking about specifically with healthcare professionals. Now, we did work, and this program is still around, with in Allegheny, there is a program called Return to Practice. It's for nurses that are returning to work after a career break, and there is there's an educational component to it, and there's also a clinical component to it. And one of the beauties of this program is the clinical component. The employer has clinics and hospitals all over Allegheny County and beyond. I'm sorry, I'm not remembering the exact name, but they're open 24/7. And so you could do your clinical field assignment at any time of night or day or the week. So that's something else to think about as a healthcare professional, is looking up return to work programs that are specifically for people who are returning to healthcare professions.
Yeah, definitely. And you're talking about Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, I assume?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. No, I know from driving through there that almost every other building is sort of owned by the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. So so there's a big healthcare presence in Allegheny County. And we have another question. I think this is a good one to end on, which is, do you see, this is from George, do you see that returnships will become more popular because of all the positions that are open in the workplace? And then Leela wants to know, how do you ask a former employer to create their first returnship?
Okay, so yes, we are seeing a period of unprecedented expansion of programs, expansion in the number of employers that want to run programs, and you know, as I'm saying, programs are scaling, and the number of programs that are being offered are increasing, and so we expect to see that continue. And I'll just say about 40% of the Fortune 50 have employers have return to work programs. Only about less than 10% of the Fortune 500, and that doesn't even count employers like TD Bank or Credit Suisse that aren't based in the U.S., so they're not part of that. Or it doesn't count like public sector. So state of Utah just started the first state returnship program, and doesn't include private companies. And we're seeing growth in all of those in all of those areas. So lots and lots of growth. Keep track by consulting that list of return to work programs that we try to keep an accurate running list on. And if you want to talk to your employer or your former employer, on our irelaunch.com website under employers, we have a section called the business case for an employer return to work program. And it is our gift to visionary managers who want to start a program inside their company. We give you all the language, and you can cut and paste it and use it however you want in terms of making that pitch about why it's a win for companies to have our talent inside companies, and not only as a diversity initiative, but as a part of their main talent acquisition strategy.
Thank you so much. Yeah, no, that is obviously so helpful, because we hope that every company's employers will be altruistic, but at the same time, they do care about the bottom line. So the business case, and you did the work for them. So that's great. Well, thank you so much, Carol. And I hope people were looking at the bottom of the screen, because we were flashing your LinkedIn profile URL. So, you know, and obviously you post a lot of great things. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for having me.
Yes, and thank you to your colleague, Shannon, who was also in the comments posting all those helpful links. So make sure you check out iRelaunch. There's a ton of information on there, and I believe I saw that their next conference will be in May. So be sure to check that out. And thank you to all of you for joining us. If you missed any part of this discussion, don't worry. A replay will be available right after the end of the broadcast. You just have to click refresh and it'll be there and you can watch the whole thing over again. And obviously, please take care of yourself. The pandemic is sort of going through a flux right now, but you could only be a good candidate. You could only get hired if you're safe and well enough to do so. And don't worry if you have more questions. We'll be back next Friday. I'm here every Friday on Get Hired Live. And next week, we'll have Daryl Ford, who is the Chief Human Resource Officer for UPS. So if you're interested in really how a large organization hires seasonal jobs, how to turn those into long-term offerings, be sure that you join us on Friday because we're going to be talking about all of that and more. And we also have a ton of programming that happens on the LinkedIn news page. And on Monday, my colleague, Caroline Fairchild, will be talking on Monday, October 11th, to two executives about how their companies are thinking about hiring during the labor shortage. That's Monday, October 11th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And again, that's on the same page, the LinkedIn news page. So like I said, please take care of yourself and best of luck until next time. And don't forget to take care of your mental health as well. On October 10th, it is World Mental Health Day. So if you're struggling with your mental health or you feel that you're reaching some limits with that, make sure you take time for yourself and take care of yourself because that will set you up for success later. We all need our little moments, so be sure to do that. And until next time, be well and best of luck.